There's a detail in this story from John's Gospel that stood out for me this time around. On the evening of the day of the resurrection, Jesus comes to his disciples, to his friends, and comes speaking peace. He comes breathing new life into them and gives them at least a beginning measure of what their mission will be. It seems that they are taken care of, except for Thomas, who somehow isn't there, and who asks, not unreasonably, in my opinion, to have the same experience that the others have in order to believe. Thomas just wants to touch and see and believe. And here is the detail that stands out for me. The text tells us that a week later, Jesus' disciples were here again in the house. A week later. Maybe it's because it's a week after Easter and I'm still in my house, and you and everyone else is to some extent still in their houses. A week later, we are still dealing with the same reality in there in the world. And we are tucked away at home, physically and virtually, with those who are close to us. A week later, and the world is still scary and still a mess for the disciples. A week later, and the world is still a scary mess for us. I'm not sure why exactly, but the fact that the disciples were still holed up together a week later makes me feel oddly hopeful in these strange days. Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus rose from the dead. He came and stood among his friends in the most disconcerting and disruptive time of their life. Everything had changed. From then on, there would be description of life as before and after the moment of time. Imagine them talking about, remember when Jesus was healing the blind man? Yeah, that was before God raised him up. Remember when we were filled with the Holy Spirit and Peter started preaching? Yeah, that was after Jesus was crucified and God raised him up. But Jesus' disciples were just the beginning of the after time. And they were scared. Every single thing had changed. Everything. And Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, not once, but twice, "Peace be with you." They rejoiced. And he breathed the Spirit into them, and he began to tell them what their life would be like now. And then a week later, they were there again, back in the house with the doors shut. There's not much sense that anything has really changed yet. The only difference is that Thomas is now where everyone else was. And Jesus came to his friends again and stands up amongst them and says, "Peace be with you," again. I feel so grateful to hear again that a week later, when the world out there is a scary mess, that Jesus doesn't just stand back and say, "I've done enough. I came to you. I stood amongst you. I spoke of peace. I breathed the Spirit into you." Jesus doesn't say, "Well, my work here is done." Jesus comes amongst them a week later, stands amongst them, and says, "Peace be with you." This is profoundly good news. Jesus is still coming among us again and again and again. Jesus comes in the midst of our protective measures. Jesus comes when we are profoundly disconcerted and still trying to wrap our heads and hearts around the current circumstances. Jesus comes especially in those marker times when we are just beginning to know that we will measure our lives as before and after these days. In our national life, many of us have marked 9/11 as the before and after event. In our personal lives, many of us mark the death of a dear one as the one before and after. And now the world will mark the coronavirus as the before and after event. Hear more good news. The profound disruption of the world was not violence or disease or death. The most profound disruption of the world was the coming of God. God pouring out God's own self for us in life, death, and the resurrection of Jesus, so that we might have life abundant, life in love, life free from fear. This is what is stirring my hope a week later. Jesus is more powerfully present in this after time than he was in the before time. Wow, I need to hear that. Jesus comes and stands among us and speaks to our hearts. Peace be with you. And breathes new life into us. And there is already and will be so much to do to mend the world in the aftertime of this virus. And like those whose first friends of Jesus, I know that we will go out and tell how God's love is stronger than death. We will act out that love in the world. But today, I am just grateful beyond measure to learn again that Jesus will be with us. Jesus will come again and again and again. with the peace and the power and the love that we will need to carry on.